Have we done the celery snap slate already? No, we've done celery, we've done fennel sticks. This is really great chicken soup. Take one. Okay, really great chicken soup. This is a recipe from Cook This Book. I think that everybody should know how to make really great chicken soup. And really, all it requires is thyme, a little bit of thyme, and a fuck ton of chicken. So you will see that I have both chicken legs and chicken wings here. The wings are gonna be part of building the broth, and they're gonna like reinforce the broth with lots of body and chicken flavor and fat. And then the legs are gonna cook in the broth along with the broth to give it more chickeny flavor, but we're gonna pull them out before they get overcooked and shred them, and the legs turn into the meat chunks that float around in the soup, and we discard the wings after they've kind of given them everything that they have to the soup. This is kind of adjacent to a classic chicken soup. So if you think of classic chicken soup, you're probably thinking celery, onions, carrots, garlic. This chicken soup has celery, leeks, parsnips, garlic, and you could also use turnips, because if any of you have been with me for some time, you know that I fuck with a turnip more than I fuck with a carrot. And actually I fucking hate carrots, even though I had carrots in a video recently, but it's another thing. I'm using parsnips in this soup because I think they have like a sweeter, more interesting flavor than carrots. If you don't like parsnips or turnips, you can use carrots. They're just not going into my soup. The other thing that's different about this chicken soup is I'm putting prunes in the broth, which I feel like is gonna freak people out, but there's this really amazing soup called kakaliki, which is a leek and prune soup that this is sort of inspired by. The prunes stain the broth this like beautiful dark brown color, and they also give it like a molassesy sweetness as a backbone. It's not a sweet soup, but it's got like this rich sweetness on the backbone, and then there'll be like little pieces of plump prunes floating around. And if that sounds gross to you, it's not. What is people's beef with prunes?
Laxative.
That's a good thing. Has a prune ever made someone's system go out of control, really?
Oh, yeah.
Is this a laxative soup?
I think this is your new cleanse. You know that there's like those famous soups that like help induce labor for,
No.
Have you heard about this?
No.
Women go into labor after they eat these meals. So people that are very pregnant and like are going into labor will go eat this specific meal.
And it's like fiber?
So this is like kind of like that, but for pooping.
So this is labor-inducing soup. It's getting rebranded from really great chicken soup to labor-inducing soup. So first things first, we're gonna build the broth. We've got 4 whole chicken legs, and we're seasoning them aggressively with salt. We're seasoning all of our chicken, both our legs and our wings, is ultimately gonna season the broth, but also that way, when we pull the meat off the bones, it's seasoned and not bland. And the reason that we use wings instead of any other part of the chicken is because wings contain a lot of connective fat and collagen, and they're dark meat and not light meat, and so they give a lot of flavor and fat and body to a broth. If you were to replace them with chicken breasts, it would be a much lighter, more innocuous broth. Just not a good idea. Also, chicken wings are cheap, and so they're something that you can kind of afford to throw 2 pounds of in a soup, let them simmer for hours and hours, and then discard them without totally breaking the bank. So any good broth starts with a base of vegetables. What we're gonna do is cut the leeks in half, and we're gonna use the darker green parts, the top halves of the leeks, to flavor the broth. So I'm just cutting it again in half because that's gonna help us unfurl all of the layers, and that's how we can peek for dirty sand. The vegetables that are seasoning the broth don't need to be cut in any particular way. You just chop them up into like large chunks so that they can mingle around in the pot.
What do you say to people that say you don't have to rinse your vegetables?
I say you have to rinse your vegetables if they're dirty, and these vegetables are dirty. Okay, so the dark greens and lighter green tops of the leeks are going into our pot. So is 1 parsnip, 4 celery stalks. Just giving these like a chop, 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 really rough chop. Doesn't really matter what it looks like. 2 garlic heads. We're gonna reserve a couple of the garlic cloves for later on. Cut the whole heads in half. And we're gonna put these into the broth, skins on and everything. So we've got 2 halved heads of garlic. going in. So in addition to the vegetables, I'm adding like a couple big sprigs of thyme, 2 big prunes. These ones are kind of small, so I'm gonna do 3. And then all of the chicken. So all of the chicken wings, 2 pounds, and then the 4 chicken legs. And it's all going into this very same pot. And then we're gonna add 12 cups of water. I'm gonna eyeball this. You basically want to make sure that everything is fully submerged in water. You don't want anything really peeking out. So here's our broth. You can see there's so much packed into this. And so we're gonna let this come up to a boil. We're gonna reduce it to a bare simmer. We'll take the legs out and we'll leave all of the wings and the vegetables and everything else in there to continue cooking. Because at that point, the legs will be tender and we can shred the meat and it'll get added into the soup later on, and the rest of it can just like keep cooking away while we prep the rest of the soup. Okay, so the soup is built in a few phases. So the first phase is building the broth. So you saw we put all of the vegetables in there, but we still have all of those same vegetables out in front of us, and that's because we're gonna add more of them later on. So the veggies are getting added in 2 additions. 1, flavor the broth. 2, sauteed into the actual soup that you'll ultimately eat. So they'll be like nice little tender, juicy pieces of celery and bits of leek and sliced garlic and some parsnip in there so that you're chewing on something. The vegetables that are in the broth back there will be so overcooked and mushed by the time we're done with them that we'll have to discard them. So right now we're just gonna prep the remaining vegetables so that once that broth is ready, we can just start sauteing and building the soup. These are very large leeks, like unusually large. So I'm gonna cut these into quarters lengthwise. So now that we have these like 1.5 inch chunks, and then we'll cut those on the bias. Okay, so here's all of our leeks. I'm gonna slice up some more garlic. As you recall, we just put a lot of garlic in the broth, but we also wanna add a little bit later on. In the last couple minutes of cooking, we're gonna add some sliced garlic, and that's gonna give a more like pungent garlic flavor versus a mellow cooked out garlic flavor. Okay, so the leeks and the garlic are gonna go together in one bowl. And then 2 more celery stalks. And these I'm also gonna cut on the bias. Another thing I love, a bias celery. So you just put it on its side and then you cut this way and then you get these amazing little arrowheads. You do want to peel the parsnips that you eat later on because their skins are a little tough. So we'll cut the bulbous part into quarters. The inside of a parsnip can be really tough, so you can just cut that out. We're gonna put more prunes in later on. It's called layering flavor. That's what we're doing. So I'm gonna cut these into just some smaller pieces. We have still another hour or so. It hasn't even come to a boil yet. Here's something to know. This guy's still looking at me, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
You still got one looking at you.
Okay, so at this point, it's about to come to a boil, and you can see that a lot of foam and scudge has risen to the top, and that's just like all of the little like proteiny bits that are coming off of the chicken wings and coagulating, and it's like basically like gross meat foam. And you just skim it off, that's all. It will create, if you leave it in there and let it simmer with the foam, your broth just won't be as clear at the end and it will have like little floaters. It's not like bad for you in any way, but I'm just not really trying to look at it. Oh my God, I honestly can't keep up with this meat foam. Look how much foam there is over there. Now we turn it down to a simmer. And the reason that you don't want it to boil like crazy is all of these impurities will get plunged back into the broth if you boil it really rapidly, and it will be hard to get rid of them. The broth has been simmering for like an hour. So you can see the color of it is now golden, thanks to the prunes. It is very chickeny because I just tried it, and the chicken legs are tender. So now I'm gonna remove the chicken legs from the broth. I'm going to leave the bones or the wings and all of their bones and all of the vegetables and the aromatics and everything in the soup and continue to simmer it while we build the soup in another pot. You'll see, I bet when I pull these out, they're gonna be so tender that they're gonna fall apart. Okay, never mind, they're not that tender. But they are tender, they're just not falling apart. We're fishing around for the legs, but we're leaving behind the wings and the rest of the broth. There's one more in here somewhere. And then this is gonna be really, really hot right now, so we're gonna let it cool for a second and shred the meat once it's cool. We're gonna make fresh vegetables over here. So we're gonna saute a couple tablespoons of olive oil. So we're in a second pot now, and then we'll strain this broth into the soup. Okay, so I have a bowl of leeks, sliced garlic, chopped prunes. I'm gonna saute. So we seasoned the chicken legs, so they seasoned the broth. Now we're seasoning the vegetables so that every part tastes seasoned and not just one. And these cook for like 5 minutes or so. We wanna get them like really meltingly tender. And now, in order to help them cook down, we're gonna add just like a couple scoops of this broth. We're now going to strain all of the rest of the broth. I'm gonna pour this over and it's gonna catch all of the bones and the vegetables, and the rest is going in. Okay, that stuff is spent. Compost it. In the soup mixture, we're gonna add the parsnips, the celery, the rest of the fresh thyme. And we're just gonna simmer this until the parsnips and the celery are tender, which will be like 3 or 4 minutes. And then while that's simmering, we can start adding the chicken from the chicken legs. We can add the meat in. So we're just going to peel off all of the skin and the fat. We're gonna pull out the bones, and then we're just gonna shred the chicken right into it, and it's really tender. You really don't have to do much at all. You just pull it and it will fall right in. Just make sure none of the bones get in there. And we're just gonna keep an eye on the parsnips and the celery, and when we feel like they're tender but not mushy, we'll take it off the heat. Very green. Fucking huge bowl of soup. It's chock full. Okay, so celery leaf for the garnish, fresh thyme. I don't feel like this bowl got enough prunes. No, I think I could use a couple prunes. And then black pepper. And that is the really great chicken noodle soup without noodles, because it's not chicken noodle soup, it's chicken soup. Okay, cool. I'll just stay here alone then.
Good, yeah.
I can't believe you haven't had the kakaliki from Salty. That's what this is inspired by. It's a good soup, huh? It doesn't taste pruny, does it now?
That's why it's so good, I think.
Could use a little more pepper, huh?
I'm gonna give this, seeing as how I'm not currently sick, can only reach a height of an 8. But honestly,
Oh, you only like chicken soup when you're sick?
No, it's a special, it basically,
It's different.
Yeah,
It's a sick 9?
Yeah, a sick 9.
It's a sick 9, it's sober 8.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
This is not prune soup. Tell them it's not prune soup. Tell them if you didn't.
Prune soup, thank God.
If you didn't know if there weren't prunes in there, let's stop talking about prunes.
I'm gonna go ahead and